From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Cheung, and this matters.
I made a mistake in not recusing myself immediately from the discussions, given our family's history, and I'm sincerely sorry about not having done that.
Right now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is facing his third ethics investigation in his nearly 5-year tenure as PM. This time, an ethics commissioner is looking into Trudeau's relationship with We Charity and how the federal government handed the charity, of which he has a personal relationship with, a $900 million sole source contract for student volunteer grants. CBC News and Canadaland also reports that Trudeau's mother and brother were paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for speaking engagements with We Charity. That's the latest problem for Trudeau. But you'll remember other ethics investigations, like back in 2017, when an ethics commissioner ruled that Trudeau had broken conflict of interest laws when his family took a Christmas vacation on the Aga Khan's Island.
On this issue of a family vacation with a personal friend, it wasn't considered that there would be an issue there.
And even just last year, when the SNC-Lavalin affair dominated headlines for months and served as the backdrop of the 2019 federal election.
I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere.
A little refresher here. Former Justice Minister and Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould said Trudeau pressured her to look for a civic penalty against SNC-Lavalin rather than a criminal one after the engineering firm admitted to bribing Libyan officials for contracts. In that case, an ethics commissioner ruled that Trudeau violated an ethics law when he used the PMO to, quote, circumvent, undermine, and ultimately attempt to discredit the former Attorney General. Why does Trudeau continuously find himself in controversies surrounding ethics? And is this becoming a hallmark of his time in office? Today, we're talking to Susan Delacourt, national columnist for the Toronto Star. Susan has been covering Parliament Hill for more than 30 years. Susan, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start first with this latest ethics investigation. There have been a few now into Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and We Charity, and really their relationship. What is the crux of the investigation that's happening?
What he apologized for those who aren't following this really closely, is he said that he should have pulled himself out of cabinet discussions on this. But I think a lot of people, including me, are wondering how a charity with this much history, not secret history, with the Prime Minister and his family, ended up being recommended as the one to handle almost $1 billion in government business. You know, it just seems that before he excused himself from cabinet, he'd say, wait a minute, this seems a bit wrong. You also think that maybe the finance minister, whose daughter worked there at We, would also say, wait a minute, I probably shouldn't be part of this discussion either. I'm having a hard time just picturing how this conversation happened at cabinet when We was recommended as the charity for somebody not to put on the brakes and say, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like a good idea. The ethics commissioner is going to find that out. We hope the opposition, maybe with their inquiries, will find that out too. But I still don't understand, after the Prime Minister's apology today, what made anyone think this was a good idea.
That even the appearance of this from the outset, it doesn't look great.
That's always what it is in ethics investigations. You know, I've been here in Ottawa 30 plus years, and I think one of the first things I learned here is it doesn't have to be real conflict. It just has to be the appearance of conflict. It's an old rule, and I didn't make it. It was made by the politicians. So, you know, we're going to have the ethics commissioner. I don't know the timeline for investigating this, but this story is not going away because of the Prime Minister's apology. Sincere as it was, and also after covering this guy for a long time, the part that really struck me as sincere and authentic was the part about his mother. We know the relationship between him and his mother. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's read his books knows that Trudeau is very protective of his mother. Anyone who knows Margaret Trudeau, she's not a secret person, knows that she does not like to cause her son grief in public. And that part seemed to me very genuine. I think it's probably been a very hard few days in the Trudeau family over this one.
I was actually going to ask you about, do we know the timeline of what the ethics commissioner and what the ruling is? But at this point, does it even matter, do you think? Given that he has been found to have broken ethics and conflict of interest laws before, does it have any teeth?
Do you have to have a ruling for this to be a bad thing? No. The mere fact that it's gone for a third time. And I wrote about this. The thing that's perplexing is there are shades and echoes of other ethics rulings in this. You know, that this is a little close to the Aga Khan, the first ethics case, which was when he accepted a holiday for free on the Aga Khan's island. And the Aga Khan is a registered charity. And the reason he went on vacation was because his wife, Sophie, and Margaret Trudeau have a relationship with the Aga Khan. They became friends with him, and out of that friendship came this totally inappropriate vacation. Those of us who remember the last kind of normal day in Ottawa was March 12th, and we learned that Sophie Gregoire Trudeau had tested positive for COVID because she and Margaret Trudeau had been at a wee event in London. Our bureau has a little chat line on Slack, and I'm very proud of our Alex Ballingall. I'll just give him a plug here. Is he got the story that we was going to be asked to handle this, and Alex said, "This strikes me as weird. Does it strike anybody else as weird?" And we all chimed in with various things like we're just talking about right now. Wait a minute. We was the charity that Margaret and Sophie were doing things for when they brought COVID to the Prime Minister's house in March. We were all aware of the deep connections between the Trudeau family and we when this story first came out, which rolls us back to the first point. Why did the Prime Minister not say, "Hey, wait a minute, my wife does a podcast for them. My mother speaks with them"? He said he didn't know how much she was paid.
I knew that my brother and my mother work as professional public speakers, and it is not surprising to me that they got paid by we, but I did not know the details. And as I said, I should have known the details.
But why wouldn't he say, that's probably a little too close? After the Aga Khan ruling, you would think that he'd be especially careful of not getting too close to anything that's too close to Margaret Trudeau and Sophie Gregoire Trudeau. It's already been written out. That story's already written. The second ethics ruling that was about SNC-Lavalin, and that's a little harder to make connections between that case and this one. But the one thing that you can say is that the government, in the way it's defending itself in this one, is very similar to SNC-Lavalin. It's about the jobs.
My job as a Prime Minister is to stand up for Canadians and defend their interests. And yes, it is essential that we do that in a way that defends our institutions, that upholds prosecutorial independence. But we need to be able to talk about the impacts on Canadians right across the country of decisions being made.
I won't apologize for, trying to do something positive for Canadians and people. And you hear the same line of defense in this too. So what he learned from the first two was, don't get too close to people who are too close to your mom. And just saying that you've got to speed things through to get jobs or do the most effective things to jobs is not a good defense either. And both of those lessons he's learned before.
One ethics investigation, I think, is a problem for any prime minister, but this is the third ethics investigation involving Trudeau. What do you think that this says about his time as prime minister? Like, what is going on here, you think?
Well, first of all, I think, you have to put this, and again, I've been here a long time, 32 years, not that I'm counting. And I do think that there has been an evolving environment in this too. I can think of all kinds of prime ministers who probably would have had several ethics investigations too, but they just didn't do those back in the day.
Or that the law wasn't as evolved as it is now around it.
There is a really zero tolerance thing about this. When I first got to Ottawa, Brian Mulroney was complaining that he was the first prime minister to have to deal with access to information. And Stephen Harper was the first prime minister who had to deal with social media and the rise of Facebook and Twitter. The ethics laws are evolving as well, too. I'm not excusing Trudeau on this one as well, but it is interesting. He got reelected after two ethics investigations. And I don't think the Aga Khan ruling came as a surprise to him. I think the investigation probably came as a surprise, but it was the first time I saw him speechless when that ruling came out. And that does reflect a certain blind spot with him is, oh, geez, my wife got me into this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is the only time I've seen him speechless, and it's usually about his family. The SNC Lavalin one came last August, which is just on the eve of the election. And that was a body blow. I don't think they were expecting it. I think they really thought it might affect their chances in the election.
And it did take over a lot of the discussion in the lead up. It certainly in the campaigning, Trudeau was answering questions every day about it on the campaign trail.
I went door to door with some candidates and it never came up at the door for Liberals. One of the things we always try to correct ourselves for here in Ottawa is the inside the bubble story versus the outside the bubble story. You saw that with his message management. He announced that the wage subsidy is going to be extended to December. He said that he was speaking to Donald Trump. That is always very interesting to Canadians about this prime minister's relationship with Trump. And then he also said, by the way, sorry about this. Mm-hmm. And what he's gambling on there is that Canadians care more about the wage subsidy, the pandemic, Trump, than they do about this inside Ottawa story. I don't know. I talked to MPs last Friday, and Nate Erskine-Smith from Beaches East York, he actually spoke on the record, which was nice. But he and the other MPs that I spoke to said they weren't getting it at the doors yet. They weren't being inundated with complaints about it. My sense talking to Liberals over the weekend and just watching the traffic is this story has punched through outside the bubble.
You think that this will move the needle a little bit of the people who are watching this, not just people who are focusing on politics every day?
I do. Right. It's a very easy story to get is Prime Minister has friends almost got favor, but it didn't happen. They've rolled back from it. And we also saw that the We charity today took out the full page newspaper ads apologizing for it and saying that more damage control is coming. They didn't put it as damage control. More apologies and more measures are going to come in the next few days too. So there is full-on retreat going on right now. There is full-on apology in as much as they can. It may cut short some of the anger that was building. There's a rule in politics. Your enemies are never the ones who do you in, it's your friends. You know? And that is definitely true in what I've seen is the worst damage done to Justin Trudeau in these ethics investigations is by his own relationships with his friends. You know, you can be your own worst enemy and your friends can come close. And I think that's what's easy for people to understand in this is Justin Trudeau had a bunch of fancy friends. His family was being paid way more money than most people see in a year. It hits a couple of sore points that people have with Liberals, that they live in a different world, they're entitled, that they're elite, they're out of touch, and that they're clubby and cliquey.
That it almost justifies some of the criticisms that people commonly have against them.
That's right. And this story played right into all of those things. So that's why it's hard to shake. I still want to know how this happened. You know, to go back what we were starting, I'm a reporter in Ottawa, and I still don't have a clue how this happened.
Susan, what is the Liberal caucus saying about all of this? What are you hearing? Are they upset with the PM?
Yes. Yeah. It's weird. It's reminded people, a couple of MPs told me this on Friday. This prime minister doesn't have a hugely close relationship with his caucus members. He's better than he was. The election was a bit of a jolt to him, and the SNC Lavalin last week was a bad week for him. But the week started pretty well, and it was the appointment of Bob Rae to the UN. And what does that have to do with any of this and your question? Bob Rae was an example of Liberal that Justin Trudeau did not have any relationship with whatsoever. And a lot of Liberals complain about that, including members of his own caucus. You know, that they don't know the guy. You know, he's very distant and aloof for all his appearances of being close. He doesn't have a lot of personal relationships with them.
Interesting.
So the Bob Rae announcement was seen as Trudeau trying to make nice with groups of people he's kept at arm's length, a product of real desire to be more consultative. So that was a good thing. And then the caucus is saying by Friday, look, we didn't know anything about this. Nobody asked us. We could see this a mile away. We were doing really well with the pandemic. Naderson Smith saying, listen, I'm mad that all the attention is on this when we've been doing such a good job proving that government is necessary in people's lives. And now we've made people cynical about government all over again. I think it's the way in which this happened that has upset people.
That this is a real setback in the way that they are perceived and perhaps the trust that many Canadians have since put on the government.
Right. We have never seen a time where the government has been more relevant in people's lives. You hear all these stories of people that were tuning in isolation every day at 11 o'clock to see the doorstep message from the Prime Minister. And he built up a lot of goodwill and trust with people on this one. And then it reinforces a lot of negative ideas that people have about politicians, which is if you're a friend, it's who you know in the PMO, that if you're a friend, you end up with advantages that other Canadians don't have. And people are feeling hurt right now, and this is a hard time for a lot of people. And the mere suggestion, the mere hint, the idea that there are some people who are doing well out of this pandemic is really, I'm sure, galling to some people. There are always going to be the Trudeau haters. My email is filled with them. You know, this is proof once again that he shouldn't have been elected. But I think he knew as late as last week that the idea that he didn't know what his mother and brother were earning was kind of hard to believe.
I mean, obviously this isn't an election year, but we saw last year, back in October, the SNC-Lavalin affair took up a lot of space for headlines. That was a huge topic of discussion. It did lead to a minority mandate for the Liberals. Do you think that these questions about ethics and how Trudeau relates to them, do you see it having any kind of longer lasting impact in this We Charity investigation?
Because it's a minority, we don't know. Before the pandemic, all the Conservative leadership candidates were vowing that as soon as they got their leadership over, which would be August 21st, back in those days, it was the end of June. But as soon as September rolled around, they were going to push for an election. Then you've heard all the Conservative leadership candidates saying now because of the pandemic, this isn't the time to collapse the government. But I bet you there are conversations right now with the various leadership candidates saying, has this weakened Justin Trudeau? Should we maybe kick up our timing a little bit about a confidence vote? Again, that's just me speculating.
You think the Conservatives smell a little blood in the water right now?
I can't see how they wouldn't. Yes, can't see how they wouldn't. Although, you know, there's a bunch of stuff circulating out there about Peter MacKay's wife's relationship with We, and Maureen Harper was very close to the We organization too. They are a non-denominational insidery organization. I can see that the drumbeats would start for an earlier rather than later election because of this. This will get Conservatives thinking again, hey, wait a minute, maybe it isn't a bad idea to prompt a no confidence vote.
I mean, it's tough to know how this plays out until even from where we are right now this week compared to when the story broke, it's shifting so quickly.
And that is a problem. You know, this is shades of other ethics controversies too. How they did not have all the information in front of them that journalists have been able to accumulate without much trouble over the course of a week or two. How the government did not have all that information before it made this decision. That's also the problem. You know, that this is happening backwards. Justin Trudeau shouldn't have been the last person to know how much mother earned from the We organization. And this is, again, what Liberal MPs were complaining about, is a lot of this stuff was happening in the news without them being told. And that feels a little familiar to all of them, too. Their due diligence was not done here.
Thinking about so much of what we've talked about in this conversation, I wanted to go back to 2015 for a moment. That was when Trudeau was swept into office. He sold himself as a change maker in Ottawa, of sunny ways, right? This idea that politics could be done differently, he was the guy to do it. 5 years onwards, what kind of legacy do you think he's building towards in his time as PM?
Well, it's funny because I did talk to somebody I know quite well over the last few days who's talked about how a longtime Liberal saying that exactly the thing you mentioned there had been squandered, that with all that sunny ways, nothing much was done with it. The Star had me write an ebook on him, and I traveled around with him for a couple of months when he was running for leader. An experience I'm very glad I did, because you got to see the connection that Trudeau has with people. He has always done his best work in politics outside Ottawa. I don't think he has ever actually really taken to Ottawa. I don't think he likes it. For all the idea that he's an insider and how politics is done, I don't think he enjoys the political heat here. And he told every one of those audiences back when he was running for leader and then in the election of 2015 that his mission was to reconnect government to people, that people were feeling distant from their governments. And weirdly enough, the pandemic gave him that. The mission that he had wanted was to reconnect people with their government again and see that it could be a force for good in their lives. And that's got to be the crushing disappointment that we were just talking about, is that it's been a 4-month role of showing exactly what he'd wanted to do and make people realize that their government has their backs, that there is a reason for a social safety net in Canada. And I think the pandemic has done a better job of demonstrating that than Trudeau does. But I don't think that we should take away from the fact that he certainly managed this better than Trump. And I don't think people will forget that. And I think people will still see that leadership matters. And when it mattered a lot, he was there. I don't think this erases all the good work that he's done. Inside the Ottawa bubble, it is a big story. I am perplexed about it. It's not going to go away. But I do think that the longer view, the pandemic is going to be the story we remember at the end of 2020.
Susan, thank you for your time and for your reporting on this.
Thanks, Adrian.
That's Susan Delacourt, national columnist for the Toronto Star. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Adrian Cheung, Saba Aitazaz, and Raju Muthar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattinen, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.